Hi everyone, my name is Casey Brady and I am a counseling student at the University of Florida. Today I would like to talk to you about suicidality in children and adolescents. So to get started, let's talk about the prevalence of suicide in this population. So suicide is currently the third leading cause of death in those between the ages of 15 and 19. And a child between the ages of 5 to 14 dies nearly every day in the U.S. as a result of suicide. There aren't as many data on child suicide rates, but some studies have found that the rates of teen suicide are increasing. So as you can see, this is a really prevalent issue, and it needs to be given a lot of attention in the community. And so let's talk about some risk factors that are associated with suicidality. So one of the strongest indications that a child is going to attempt suicide is going to be previous attempts. So once they have attempted once, their likelihood of attempting again goes up significantly. So this is a population we really need to make sure that we are keeping an eye on and supporting. Adverse life events has also been tied to a greater likelihood of suicidality. So adverse life events can include sexual abuse, physical abuse, legal problems, family conflict, things along that nature, conflict with peers. So if a child has experienced these adverse life events, then we just need to, again, make sure that we are tuning in to how they're feeling. The presence of mental disorders. So mental disorders have a strong comorbidity with suicide. So if there's a presence of depression, anxiety, ADHD, schizophrenia, or other disorders, there is a greater likelihood that the child will have suicidal thoughts or ideations or attempt suicide. Drug and alcohol use has been linked to suicide, as well as stressful life events and trauma. And then finally, living in a single parent household or in a rural region has been tied to a greater likelihood of suicide. So those are the risk factors. So let's talk about some protective factors. So a protective factor is going to be a behavior in the child or something in their environment that is going to decrease the likelihood that they will experience suicidal thoughts. So one protective factor is going to be physical recreation. So having a sense of belonging in a community, engaging in physical activity, that can really be a good sign that a child isn't experiencing suicidal thoughts. Achieving and working hard. So achievement is really important for children. Having a sense of accomplishment, having a sense of working towards something, and having a goal. So if you see your child is getting good grades, they have a sense of belonging in a peer group, and they have a strong sense of accomplishment, then that's going to be a really good sign. Conversely, if your child is not having as great of grades, or they feel like they're falling behind, they feel like they're not working towards something, they don't have a goal, then that's something you're going to want to keep an eye on. Seeking relaxing diversions, that's also a good protective factor. Cooperativeness, so strong levels of cooperation have been shown to have a correlation with a decreased likelihood of suicide. And then life event experience. So the more life events that your child has experienced, the less likely they are to have suicidal thoughts. So after talking about the different factors, you're probably wondering, what can I do for my child or for a child in my life? So one of the best things you can do is put your child in counseling. So counseling can be a great preventative measure. Talking about those feelings before it leads to suicide attempts. It can also be a good way to assess lethality within your child, because counselors will be trained to do that. Additionally, there's been a lot of success with various forms of counseling in suicide intervention. So even after your child has expressed suicidal thoughts, or if they've already attempted suicide, counseling can be a really great way to intervene and lessen the likelihood of a reattempt. Talk to your child about suicide. So this can be really scary for a lot of parents, and it is a really delicate topic. So I encourage you to research how to talk about your child about suicide. And the way you talk to them and what information you convey is going to depend a lot on their age and their maturity level. But it's really important to have that conversation and not to shy away from it, because they're going to learn about suicide from the media or from their peers. It's unavoidable. So you want to make sure that they are receiving accurate information from you, and also by talking to your child about suicide, you are conveying that you are a safe place and they can come to you if they have suicidal thoughts. That way it's just an open line of communication. You can encourage recreational involvement if that's something your child has expressed interest in, especially if it's something like sports that's physical. And then finally, listening to your child. So if you hear your child saying things like, the situation is hopeless, or it's just not worth it, I can't do this anymore, that's a sign that you really need to tune into how they're feeling and have a conversation about how they're feeling and what's causing them to feel that way. And it can be appropriate to say, hey, I've noticed that you said it's not worth it anymore, and I'm wondering, have you thought about killing yourself, or are you having suicidal thoughts? And just opening up that conversation so that they can come to you. So those are some things that we can do on an individual level with our children, but this is also a community issue. So let's talk about some things that we can do in the community to help decrease suicidality in children and adolescents. So one thing you can do is supporting local crisis centers and organizations that do suicide prevention or intervention. So support can be monetary, so you can do donations, or you can give your time and volunteer. A lot of these are nonprofit, and so they really rely on volunteers to help out. Another thing you can do is share resources, and I'm going to have some resources at the end of my presentation. And sharing resources can look like telling a friend that you're worried about a hotline or about a counseling service, or it can be sharing resources on social media so that more people can see them, because you never know who's going through something or whose child is having suicidal thoughts, so just spreading awareness as best you can. And finally, what we can do is destigmatize suicide. So a lot of children have expressed guilt or shame around suicidal thoughts, and because of this guilt or shame, they don't reach out and they don't seek help until it's too late. So by taking away that stigma and that shame, we can encourage children to come to a safe place and ask for help before they attempt suicide, so that they can be protected and supported. So destigmatizing suicide is a very large goal. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing you can do, again, is have that conversation with your child. Make sure that they're getting accurate information and that they know they can come talk to you. Another thing we can do is pay attention to the implicit ideas that we are giving our children. So a lot of the language around suicide really portrays the person in a really negative light. So oftentimes people will say they committed suicide, and that just really puts a criminality on the behavior. So instead, saying things like attempted suicide or completed suicide. Again, a lot of people will use euphemisms for suicide, and that just really conveys the message that this is a shameful, stigmatized topic that we can't talk about. So make sure you're being frank and saying things about suicide. Instead of using euphemisms that can convey that discomfort in the area. And then finally, think about how you're talking about suicide in front of your children. When you talk about someone who's killed themselves, are you acting like it's a moral failing on their part, or are you approaching it with empathy? And just really making sure that whenever you talk about suicide, you are coming to the topic with empathy and understanding. And so here are some resources that people can utilize. There's the National Suicide Hotline. That's a 24-hour hotline that anyone can call. There's the Trevor Project, which is for LGBTQ+ youth. And then there's the Trans Lifeline, which is for the trans community. Gainesville also has the Alachua County Crisis Center. So they have a 24-hour hotline, and the number is right there. And then they also offer counseling services. So these are some really great resources that you can share and utilize. And finally, I just want to thank everyone for their time and attention. And together, let's destigmatize suicide and let's break the silence around suicide in children and adolescents. Thanks.